Licensed video games get a bad rep, and I mean, rightfully so. They've had a history of being underwhelming, quick to market, and frankly, bad. When the video game market crashes, typically attributed to a single licensed game, well, you know it's an uphill battle. I think everyone out there's had a negative experience with some movie or cartoon-based video game at some point, but I also think that hidden underneath the endless vat of garbage are a ton of excellent games. Case in point, Capcom and Disney. Capcom really went out there and showed us that yes, not all licensed video games have to be Mad Max or Ghostbusters. Games like DuckTales, Darkwing Duck, Chip and Dale, and Tailspin kicked some serious butt, even holding up today. The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle beat-em-ups, every single one of them, still good. Sure, good licensed games might have gone out of style for a while in the early 3D Dead Zone, but 2012's Walking Dead showed us that there was still a place for these tie-in video games to shine. I think that when you start talking about the good licensed games, there's a lot of commonly covered ground. Lots of GoldenEye, Batman Arkham, South Park, and KOTOR's popping up. And how could you not? Some of these are absolutely fantastic. But I'm more interested in showcasing some of the lesser known gems, the licensed games that are good. Not everything has to be a flawless 10 out of 10 licensed game like Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2. We're not all that blessed. So yo, it's Austin, and today we're gonna be talking about some good-ass licensed games, some of which you might have missed if you weren't paying attention. But first, and I'm sure you've noticed how fresh I'm looking right now, thanks to today's sponsor, GlassesUSA.com. GlassesUSA.com are an online retailer who have cut out the middleman to offer prescription eyeglasses and sunglasses at affordable prices, up to 70% off. A basic pair of frames like these, the Atoto Westons, start at around $30, which is really high quality for the amount that you're paying, and that also includes the lenses, which is a pretty great deal. There's over 9,000 styles of glasses to pick from, by the way, so they're guaranteed to have something that fits you, your face, and your style. GlassesUSA.com actually sent me a couple more pairs to show off to you guys. Kinda like these, the Costa Del Mar Ocean Ridge 220s. I've always been a fan of the rectangular lenses, and I think these fit me pretty perfectly. You can click the link down in the description to check them out yourself. If you're browsing for frames, there's actually a virtual mirror feature on the website, which allows you to see what a pair looks like on any picture of you. And there's a 14-day return period with a 100% money guarantee, so there's no risk. GlassesUSA.com also offers blue tinted glasses and yellow tinted in case you're doing a lot of video editing work or playing a lot of games for several hours at a time. I love this pair, the GameSpecs Omega. They have like a cool little flourish at the end here. I pretty much have been wearing these constantly. There's also the Revel Floyds here. I like these, the color on the side and the front. There's actually a ton of different color variations online to pick from. And if you don't have or remember your prescription, you can use an app scanner they got on mobile, and that'll help you figure it out. So if you need eyeglasses like these, cut out the middleman, click the link down in the description, and visit GlassesUSA.com for an offer specifically for you guys. Thanks so much for the sponsor, and it's time for video games. Let's get this started by talking about some cartoons. Kids' cartoons and video games go hand in hand, like peanut butter and jelly. They're practically made for each other. Any person who ever played a video game probably played a licensed cartoon game at some point, and it most likely sucked. As I said with Disney and Capcom, they pulled out some bangers and released them all over the Nintendo, and everything was jolly. On the Sega front of things, they actually partnered up with Disney to make some first-party exclusive games as well. The most famous of the bunch being Castle of Illusion starring Mickey Mouse, which would go on to get a remake in the 2010s. This game was great, and so was the sequel it got, World of Illusion. Just don't talk about Fantasia, please. But between those two games is a little Genesis title that has always been one of my favorites, Quackshot starring Donald Duck. Most of the time all these games back in the day would be just vaguely about some movie or cartoon plot, but Quackshot was unique in that it was its own new original thing. D-Duck steals a book out of Uncle Scrooge's house, stumbles upon an ancient treasure conspiracy, suddenly leaves his life and wife behind, and decides to go a spelunking. Clearly a healthy relationship. You team up with a bunch of fellow family ducks in order to travel the entire planet to find the goods. That's Mexico, Transylvania, India, Egypt, the works. Duckburg, that's real. It's not even a linear game because you have to travel from place to place as you collect power-ups, putting Quackshot closer to Metroid territory than your standard run-of-the-mill platformer. The main hook here is a plunger, actually. Donald uses this thing in order to stick to walls as temporary platforms. You can even bounce higher off of them. So you're basically creating the platforming as you go, which is unique. and I like it. While the controls can be pretty frustrating and floaty, I think Quackshot has a lot going on for it, especially with the old hardware it's on. It's one of those cute adventure games that, if you were a child, was probably the coolest thing ever. Quackshot holds a candle up there with some of the Capcom Disney greats, but most importantly, it was the first real Donald Duck video game to reach a Western market. Meaning, it was the first video game to show us this, and I think that says everything. He's so thick! So keeping the cartoon theme rolling, let's talk about a video game that stars America's most popular and famous family, The Simpsons. The Simpsons need no introduction. We've talked about them before in my 90s arcade games video. They're the only scripted television show that's been running for the entirety of my existence, let alone probably most of you. And since the beginning of its inception were the video games. Bart's too cool for school attitude practically set up the no care in the world, overly sarcastic youth of the 90s, and those kids loved them video games. It's just unfortunate that most of them were not good. But all of that luck changed with the release of, well, actually, I think the consistency's never been great, but Simpsons Hit and Run was a really solid game that I think most fans know of or have played. I actually like Simpsons Road Rage on the virtue of it being a total ripoff of Crazy Taxi alone, but what I want to talk about today is the lesser spoken of game, the Simpsons game. Very original title, I know. Coming out around the same time as the Simpsons movie, a game is one of those super underappreciated titles that's completely disappeared from all digital storefronts, meaning the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 versions of it have begun to shoot up in price, which also means I'm making it worse. This is one of those open world games that has really tightly designed levels, a slight amount of jank in the controls, and a lot of personality that I found captured the good elements of the show. The Simpsons have caught a lot of flack in the last few years for being a shell of its former self, but the jokes in game land more than you'd think.
What are you doing near a video game store? Buying a video game?
It also turns into a time capsule of gaming culture in the late 2000s, as a lot of old cliches and jokes from that time are in full force here. I didn't think I'd be stumbling upon an old snake meme in a game from 2007 in the year 2021, but, well, it really do be like that. Each of the four Simpsons has a completely different playstyle and power-ups that lead to some pretty fun gameplay. Lore-wise, Simpsons lore, if you care, Bart stumbles upon a manual called the Simpsons Game, which essentially was like God giving the cast cheats and enabling crazy superpowers to fight off an alien invasion. Bart becomes Bartman and uses a slingshot. Lisa,
who'd want to play her,
has a god game thing going on and uses the power of Buddhism in order to levitate objects. Marge is like Pikmin and she rallies the troops with a megaphone to cause chaos and do mom things. And Homer becomes a giant ball and rolls around like Katamari. Also, here's a Katamari reference. It's like this game is aimed directly at me. Each level is its own big thing, and there's also a giant overworld with a ton of collectibles and things to do. It's just a really enjoyable game. The only major issues I have are that the combat is kind of janked up at times with a 3-hit combo and feels unnecessarily stiff. But when it comes to a licensed game resembling its source material, it's hard to get much closer than this. Also, I just really wanted to compare this directly to Family Guy Back to the Multiverse since I talked about that one last year, and it's night and day. For instance, this one made me smile. This one made me want to die. I think if this got a modern port, it would be really appreciated by fans, and I hope that happens, instead of more mobile games. Dear God. Beyond just cartoons, the good licensed video games extend to the 3D realm as well. And no, not Beast Wars and Reboot. I'm talking real people. We have the technology to literally mocap somebody's face and entire body onto a model of them in-game. So let's talk about real people. The biggest example, of course, being Star Wars. There is a never-ending supply of Star Wars video games that go from the early 80s to now. There's Super Star Wars, Lego, Battlefront 2, the old one, Jedi Academy, Rogue Squadron, KOTOR. They're even re-releasing Republic Commando, which is awesome. But I started to think, wait, what about the other Star thing? The series that's been around longer but had a little less success with, well, just about everything. Are there good Star Trek video games? While the most recent one is a good one to play if you dig macrophilia, it turns out the early 2000s had a couple bangers. Now, a majority of Star Trek tie-ins are frankly kind of weird. A bulk of everything released falls into simulation, strategies, point-and-click adventures, and games that just kind of look like spreadsheets. However, during the run of Deep Space Nine, Voyager, and Enterprise, we'd get more action-oriented stuff. As it turns out, people are less interested in text-based trivia and instead setting phasers to kill and throwing massive rocks. So in 2000, Raven Software, the dudes behind Hexen, Jedi Outcast, and Singularity, released Star Trek Voyager Elite Force. And it's very good. Turns out something running on id Tech 3, the engine Quake 3 and all of these games were on, would be good. On the PC anyways, don't touch the PS2 port. Don't do it. Now, as a kid, I used to watch whatever Star Trek was on with my mom at the time. Voyager and Deep Space Nine kind of blended together to me because my brain was just thinking about Bomberman. It's a new Bomberman. But I remember a few Voyager characters bright and clear. Captain Janeway was pretty rad, and Tuvok was also great. So how about a game on the Quake engine where you play as an OC redshirt sent out to do various tasks for the crew of the Voyager as the Hazard Team, most of which involve either Star Trek world building or lots of shooting. Yeah, this one's a no-brainer. Elite Force takes you through a bunch of different set pieces like a Borg cube, Etherian ships, a scavenger base filled with Klingon. It's got that old school classic FPS vibe and level design, and the only real complaint I have here is the lack of visual variety. Something like Star Trek lends itself to planet exploration, which could lead to different types of outdoorsy levels. Granted, we have a lot of really cool space architecture to explore here, but the practice room looks like a town from the Wild West, and that shows an example of what could have been there. But the game itself is, well, a Quake clone with a Star Trek skin. It makes up for all of that. You know what to expect. Lots of weapons of the explosive variety with multiple fire types, quick-paced combat, and funky levels with occasional platforming bits. It's definitely got some of the year 2000 jank going on from time to time, but it's fine. You okay there, Janeway? Elite Force got a sequel that's held in slightly less regards, despite having a lot of Patrick Stewart on screen, but it's hard to top Raven Software's lightning in a bottle with the original. It is just a complete shame that both of these are currently becoming lost to time, as there's no legal way to obtain either of them. You can probably blame Paramount for that one. Probably Wesley Crusher too. Shut up, Wesley. Sticking with the real people thing, let's talk about a fictional character. One of the biggest British cultural icons in media, besides the Beatles of course, was Agent 007 or James Bond. The British Secret Service agent has been the star of many classic spy and action flicks since the 60s, being portrayed by actors of all qualities. Rest in peace to Sean Connery, who portrayed the most iconic version of the character and easily my favorite film, From Russia with Love. They say your favorite Bond is the one you grew up with, and well, I can't not see the character as Pierce Brosnan, but I do wish I could unsee Die Another Day. With the exception of 4 or 5 subpar titles like 007 Racing, some of the older Amiga and PC games, and oh my god, James Bond Jr., they've had a pretty decent run, even if most of them turn into massive shootout murder fests in the first person, which isn't really Bond. Well, maybe Timothy Dalton Bond.
I help people with problems.
When the most recently released Bond game was 2012's 007 Legends, a very clearly knockoff on Call of Duty, it's easy to see that the concept is misunderstood. These days, IO Interactive, the dudes behind the new Hitman, are working on a fresh start for the series, which has a ton of potential, but today we're going to be looking at an older game you may not have heard of. Before GoldenEye decided to make James a mass murderer, Bond games were more varied. You had point-and-click adventures, boat racing games, and, of course, a Zelda clone on the Game Boy. James Bond 007 for the Game Boy. A little cartridge adventure brought to you by Sapphire and Nintendo, the latter of which decided to royalty-free the cover of the game so they didn't have to pay Brosnan for his likeness. Nice. When I think of bite-sized games back in the day, especially on the original Game Boy, I tend to have a lot more leniency towards stiffness and jank, but James Bond actually feels pretty good to play, even in 2021. It's a very simple game, following Bond on a mission spanning several levels, countries, and continents. It's the same feel as a top-down Zelda, but with a few more spy elements thrown in. You're searching for clues, keys for doors, you have smarmy dialogue, you play games in a casino in order to find a contact. It's a very simple game, but a really enjoyable one. There's a lot of talking to NPCs to find objects, a lot of combat, which, while simple, was perfect for this little thick boy. For a franchise that becomes one to lean pretty much exclusively on first-person shooters, having something different to play was a nice touch. If there's one thing this game does really well, it's feel like a proper Bond adventure. While the story's definitely not gonna convey that, as well as something of a modern AAA quality, the fact that you spend time talking to all the NPCs and exploring adds a lot of flavor. It's definitely not the best James Bond game, that would probably be the canceled port of GoldenEye, but a cute game that I'll always remember. Also, the music slaps. Next up, probably the second most common type of licensed game out there would be superhero games. It's like an endless vortex one with Superman 64, but also one with the best of the best, the cream of the crop. Superhero video games are omnipresent, dating themselves all the way back to the beginning of time itself, the Atari 2600. Superman here was certainly a video game, but examples of licensed video games cover the entire spectrum. You've got the countless mediocre ones like Kick-Ass the Game, the bottom of the barrel with Aquaman or the Man of Steel. There's cult classics like Hulk Ultimate Destruction and Maximum Carnage. Then there's critically and commercially acclaimed titles like Spider-Man or Arkham Asylum. Whatever your flavor of superhero, be it Marvel, DC, indie, or hell, we haven't even touched on anime or manga, there's probably something there for you. Just maybe stay away from the Sega Marvel collab and LJN. Just don't do it. But one superhero in particular has typically had games on the higher end of the quality spectrum, and you might know him as the terror that flaps in the night. Wait, no, that's Darkwing Duck. Batman. The Caped Crusader's been lucky throughout the years with a pretty untouchable streak of good to excellent video games ever since Arkham Asylum released 11 years ago. Most of these titles are darker in nature, very gothic visually, and heavy hitting, which is appropriate for the post-Christian Bale Batman world we live in. It's certainly better than the Batman and Robin PS1 game. Oh god, why? But the era of Batman that will always be symbolic to me is the one from the 90s. Not Tim Burton, not George Clooney, but Batman the Animated Series. The one that popularized Mark Hamill as the Joker. The one that was so popular and well made, it started the first modern instance of a universe in fiction, having 8 different shows all work together as one cohesive story. Most of which sporting an art style that would become iconic for Western animation, even being used in a Pearl Jam music video, Do the Evolution. Watch that if you get a chance, it's great. The song's good too. It's a favorite band, whatever. It's evolution, baby! This show was dope and extremely successful. Popular enough to, of course, give us not one, but a ton of different video games, some of them great, some of them Gothic City Racing. There's actually 2 games here, one on the SNES and Genesis, but we're gonna be going with Sega today, mostly because it's something I grew up with. This game is really something special. Both versions look strikingly like the show, but the Genesis version leans into the technical marvel aspect on multiple occasions. When you look at early games on the console like, I don't know, Altered Beast, and then this, it's night and day. There's tons of faux 3D effects and incredible amounts of color and shading on the screen. They decided the best thing to do here was to make Batman and Robin a 2D run-and-gun style game like Contra, and it's definitely Contra hard. The developer, Clockwork Tortoise, really outdid themselves here on every front. Yeah, maybe it's weird that Batman's stalked out of his gourd with batarangs and he's throwing them and there's power-ups, and it's definitely not the most Batman game, but this being a 2-player co-op run-and-gun with a killer soundtrack and an immense amount of challenge, variety, and style more than makes up for it. I just like the game, it's fun to play. Batman is bonus. The difficulty though might be a bit much for some. You've got a tight amount of lives and continues to take you all the way to Mr. Freeze, but this is one of those games where once you're out of those lives, you'll be going back to the beginning of the level, and those levels are long. But like Contra, a lot of enjoyment comes out of replaying, learning, growing, becoming stronger, and I don't know, a little bit of effort goes a long way. As a kid, I could barely get to the second actual level, and I didn't really get to play with friends, but it's not like I could tell anyways, because this game literally doesn't stop. You beat a boss, and then like half a second later and you're in the next level and it's like, go! Maybe another day I'll look at the SNES counterpart, but you should give this one a chance. It's a shame that Clockwork Tortoise went defunct. They were working on an X-Women game, and seeing this, it would have been dope. So, shifting latitude for a bit, comics are cool, but what about the land of the rising sun? There are a ton of licensed anime and manga video games out there, and I've already covered a ton of them, so why not a few more? There's endless licensed anime titles out there, but the good ones are even more rare. And there's no genre of game that's used more commonly with anime than fighters. Holy crap. If you were to delete every video game from existence with the exception of anime fighters, you would still have too many games. Not very good ones, but still. Modern anime fighters have gone for this weird 3D arena thing popularized by companies like CyberConnect 2, and frankly, I'm not really into it. As much as I like me some JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Eyes of Heaven and All-Star Battle just aren't that good. No. Especially when you throw it up against the classic arcade one. But the anime fighter I want to look at today is from a series I grew up with thinking was literally the coolest thing to ever happen. An anime fighter from a very unlikely candidate, Mobile Suit Gundam. And while I love Gundam Versus, we're keeping it 2D. This here is Gundam Battle Assault 2, and it's one of the only Gundam games to be released in America before Japan, which is crazy, and also, this is my original copy from 2002, which means it's probably older than most of you. Gundam dabbled in 2D fighters for a while in the 90s, starting with that amazing arcade game. There was a decent G Gundam fighter on the SNES, but the important one here was Gundam Wing Endless Duel. This game, frankly, was and still is ahead of its time. If you were to tell me that this was on the same platform as Hey Punk, Are You Tough Enough? I wouldn't have believed you. So move forward to the PlayStation 1 and we've got Gundam Battle Assault, followed by, of course, the sequel. These were so fun. Gundam Wing and G Gundam were gaining a lot of popularity in the States around this time, despite one of them being
I'll kill you.
So this features them front and center, with the American release axing multiple Zeta suits in order to make way. Am I salty? Absolutely. Yes, of course I am. But I can't stay mad for too long when the back of the case tells me to literally suit up or shut up. The low poly 3D backgrounds mesh extremely well with the highly detailed sprites of each of the mobile suits. Battle Assault 2 has such a unique look to it that it's hard not to be pulled in by, especially when a lot of them start moving around like they're martial artists in cosplay. It's basically a standard Shoto fighter with the systems not being very complex, with every super being the same quarter circle combination, but the way the sprites move and reflect damage is great. Like the suit breaks. This unnecessary details, but I like it. My only qualms here are like whenever you're playing the main story mode called Streets for some reason, every super is met with
Gundam Hammer! Gundam Hammer! Gundam Hammer! Gundam Hammer!
in versus mode, that's gone thankfully. Oh, also, the large mobile suit bosses, pain in the ass. Best to cheese them. Big Zam's a mother. So yeah, it's pretty good. It's a lot better than you would expect. And I'm not sure how, but Gundam Battle Assault 3 ended up sucking. It's probably this right here. Yeah, that'll do it. There are a ton of good Gundam games we can talk about. After all, someone's got to praise Zeonic Front one of these days. But for now, let's just move on. Otherwise, I'm just gonna cry about Dynasty Warriors Gundam 3. After all, we've got more important video games to cover, like the anime version of Wizard of Oz. Yes, it's real. I'm really not sure how or why this exists. It's probably because The Wizard of Oz is public domain. And that's how we got things like 2008's Beyond the Yellow Brick Road for the DS, a Japanese anime-styled RPG made by Mediavision, the people behind Wild Arms. No stutters here. Mediavision's first project after the unfortunate ending of Wild Arms as a series was a licensed Wizard of Oz RPG. And this is way better than it has any right to be. In Japan, this game was known as this. Rizwad? It's apparently an anagram of Wizard and Oz that they just thought sounded cool. I can't imagine that selling well anywhere. Anyways, you play as Dorothy, of course, except with a cute new design. Same for the whole classic cast. Just like in the original classic isekai novel, you get transported to another world where you end up finding the Great Wizard Oz, who wants you to defeat 4 evil witches. It's basically the same thing. Most of this plays out like a cute dungeon crawler with a Dragon Quest looking battle system. The main hook is that the entire experience is being played with a stylus. Dorothy moves around using a digital trackball, and it actually works better than you would expect. A lot of the dungeons are narrow, and you have to swipe up and down on the ball in order to move her around, where you can dodge enemies or try to fight stuff. Then, in combat, it's very typical, with the main catch being the amount of action points you use being character dependent. It's kind of weird, but one of those, we have to make every JRPG different things at the time. So on top of a strange concept and license, it's got weird mechanics as well. Essentially, something destined to sell minimal copies. But a cute experience that's really unlike anything I've played. It does help that it has a great soundtrack headed by Hitoshi Sakimoto, the dude behind Final Fantasy Tactics and 13 Sentinels. He, Naruki Michiko, and Masaharu Iwata put a ton of effort into this, making a beautiful soundtrack for the DS that completely exceeds most sound fonts used by other companies, including Nintendo. Basically, it's very good. The Wizard of Oz Beyond the Yellow Brick Road is one of those games that launched out of the gate into the realm of obscurity with no stops, and it will likely stay there. But it's one that I think deserves a bit of your time. The concept alone is bonkers, and maybe it's a bit old at this point, considering the Switch is a portable console. But for a DS game, it's pretty alright. Plus, you get a cute pop version of Somewhere Over the Rainbow for an intro. Who doesn't like that? Give me more of that. Weird things that shouldn't exist. Kind of like good movie tie-ins. There's one more major category of a licensed game, and the one most commonly seen with Dread. With rare exception, the popularity of film or Hollywood-fueled movies are typically flash in the pan. Especially in 2021, they have way less staying power than something more serialized on Netflix. Does anyone remember the Pagemaster game? Or Pagemaster? Anyone know that? So a licensed movie video game typically is rushed to market to coincide with the movie's release, sometimes without all the information needed to make it make sense. I'd say a good 9 out of 10 times these are pretty shit. But then sometimes you'll get the rare killer app, GoldenEye, The Chronicles of Riddick, Ghostbusters. So for this video, I'm gonna finish with a killer app that wasn't just a movie tie-in, but also a launch title. Put your hands together for Peter Jackson's King Kong, the official movie of the game for the Xbox 360. That's the full name. If I told you that the developers of Beyond Good and Evil made this, would you believe me? Ubisoft Montpellier got tasked with creating a tie-in for Peter Jackson's highly anticipated, massive upcoming film, the reboot of King Kong. And they did so for every console and portable imaginable. After the crazy wide success of the Lord of the Rings films and games, how could anyone let something with the Peter Jackson name go untouched? Well, lucky them, and lucky gamers too, the King Kong video game ended up being pretty dope. Directed by Michael Ansel, one of the guys responsible for Rayman, King Kong's about as much as you can expect from a tie-in video game. One that follows the entire plot of the film while adding bits and pieces to fill in gaps. One that gives the player as much perspective into the story as possible, while also providing a decent gameplay experience. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of the film. Maybe a movie about a big monkey didn't need to be over 3 hours long, but who am I to critique such majesty? Big monkey! In an effort to not pay Adrian Brody, you play the game in the first person as his character, Jack Driscoll, who's found his way to Skull Island with an eccentric director, Carl, played by Jack Black. They just want to make a dope-ass movie, but that's all ruined when confronted by natives, big monkey, dinosaurs, massive bugs, capitalism, and the hubris of man, I guess. This is all followed pretty closely in Peter Jackson's King Kong the movie the game. So this is obviously a first-person shooter that has a mix of puzzle and FPS elements. You spend a lot of time sleuthing around looking for spears and ways to interact with the environment, as well as blasting down massive creatures. And the characters on screen try to warn you about them, but the audio mixing gets in the way sometimes.
Looks like some kind of This is not completely lost.
Oh, and then also you can play as the big monkey, and you smash and chase girl? I mean, what to say, you're King Kong. It's a King Kong video game, of course you're gonna play as him. It's not as tight as the rest of the game, but some of the camera angles make it feel really cinematic and dope. King Kong tried to have a cool instance of 3D audio coming from different sources, but if you're too far away, it just turns into noise. With headphones on, this feels great though. Skull Island spends a lot of time being rainy, dank, cavey, and filled with all sorts of creepy, crawly stuff, so they did a good job with the audio. I think that King Kong is a perfect launch title. It was multi-plat with the previous gens, but it was also a showcase of what the 360 could do. It's the same game, but bigger in a widescreen resolution. It's experimental, giving the player no aiming reticle by default. It's got a big presentation that at the time was reserved for the AAAs like God of War. The first time the perspective shifts to Kong and it lets you run around like a glorified QuickTime event, it's like, whoa, 2005 sure is neat. Even though most of the game looks the same in the environment, even though the AI bugs out sometimes causing you to have to reset, even though it's not perfect, I think that King Kong's a pretty dang good licensed game. What else was around in 2005? Garfield saving Arlene? Well, that's all for today. Licensed games can go all over the spectrum, as I'm sure we're all aware, and I'm glad to finally sit down and talk about some of my favorites with y'all. And join me next time when I talk about a Japanese RPG for the PlayStation 1 that everyone's forgotten about. That's like 50 games. Thanks for watching. Make sure to check out today's sponsor, GlassesUSA.com, to check out some of the frames that I was wearing and a special offer just for you guys. Special Patreon shout out to Chris Shelton, Brendan Howell, Christopher Olivia, D.A. Stevens, Darren Newton, Donald Dowdy, DX Buster, David Molnar, Eli Shane Staufenecker, GM Pinks, Jacoby Fitzpatrick, Jordy McCaffrey, Kevin Zanowski, Kieran Arter, Nick Irving, P-Funk, Pepe, Ryan Talbert, and Zach Porter. Thank you so much for your generous support. All right, we back, baby. I'll see you guys next week with a new video. Also, I'm going to start streaming on Twitch starting tomorrow, or that's the 17th of March 2021, by the way, in case you're watching this in the future. Join me.